American diner, an appropriate place, I think, to look in the rearview mirror, pull over and see what was happening a decade ago in e-mountain bikes, because I think it's quite revealing the attitude towards them back in the day. But more than that, the limited product available, and if at all, we were talking about tech. I think it also tells us a lot about how the conversation has shifted. Today, we're talking about battery size and reliability and power and torque and adjustability and also prices. Back then, a lot of the magazine pieces were largely focused on the attitudes towards eMTB rather than pure performance. Nobody was discussing torque or technical climbing. We were, after all, at the very height of enduro MTB. All we worried about is how much fun we could actually admit we were having. Such simple days, such simple bikes. So how far have we come and what's exactly changed? Now, I think this is really quite timely because the Don has joined me on EMBN, and this is a position, this is a mindset where I was at about a decade ago, well, for a short while at least, because the fact is that e-mountain bikes were really thin on the ground back then. Now, back at the end of 2014, I was riding this beauty, the Haibike Xduro Enduro Pro 26. It had a Bosch motor, a 400 watt-hour battery, 60 newton meters of torque, 180 mil travel, and it weighed in at 22 kilos. I think this is the revealing bit because as 2014 concluded, in the magazine I say, I was done with heavy legs and loved the extended horizons that an eMTB offered. The problem is I was still in that in-between moment and I wasn't prepared to fully commit. And I'm sure there's many people out there who've got that mindset today. However, the year concluded with me saying I didn't want to be a slave to the battery. And I think when you look at today, the fact that we've got 800 watt-hour batteries, because what happened from 2014 onwards is the tech and the amount of e-mountain bikes on the market absolutely exploded. Now, my first proper e-mountain bike experience actually came earlier in 2014 with the Cube Stereo Hybrid 140. Now, this was arguably the first ever true e-mountain bike on the market. Again, it's got a Bosch motor, 60 newton meters, 400 watt-hour battery, which you had to charge off the bike. And get this, 485 mil chainstays. Now, I want to just quickly talk about or go through the words that were spoken in the magazine back at the time. Now, my editor at the time, my dear old mate Mike Rose, said, "I hate myself for saying this, but riding it was a right laugh." And I wrote myself, "From the outset, it troubles me that there are some key questions I'm thinking that might need to be asked. Is it fun?" I mean, honestly, that's all I could think about. I mean, folks, look at this bike. Things have moved on quite a bit, right? I'm just going to quickly go through the magazine of 2014, because I think many of you will relate to some of the things going on back then. My colleague, the Don, was racing enduro, probably no idea that e-mountain bikes would be such a big part of his future. I was actually racing a 11 kilo lefty 110 mil travel bike out in Spain. A lefty is a single-sided fork from Cannondale. Blake Sampson, another colleague, was doing jumps, no change there. There was an electric fork in the market, and I think now and back then, behind the scenes, I'm still working with some of the same people. I just want to go back to some of the mindset of the time. In the magazine, these are my words. There will be magazine editors and bike testers hiding under the covers, I can assure you of that. That's in relation to this Cube bike. Eager not to alienate or upset their readers. I mean, that's how feared e-mountain bikes were at the time. The stance will more likely be one of derision, but worse than that, indecision. I think it's only really in recent years that people in maybe the UK and in America have actually got e-mountain bikes. And then moving on, there's this statement here which says, "Diving into this one certainly made me think, shall I walk away and pretend it doesn't exist?" I really was questioning whether to actually feature this bike in the magazine. But it did exist, and I think those thoughts went through my mind probably for about a minute. Now, I just want to compare and contrast this bike from a decade ago to some of the bikes today. Now, let's have a look at the details. Fox 34 fork, 140 mil travel, a full aluminium chassis, 400 watt-hour battery, 60 newton meter motor, 485mm chainstays, we can forget that for a minute. It's not Bosch's smallest motor, that's for sure. So if you think about it, 60 newton meters, 400 watt-hour battery, and around about 20-21 kilos. Now this bike will actually be considered to be a lightweight eMTB today. I mean, back then we weren't even discussing torque or watt hours or things like that. I mean, you would actually struggle to find a 27.5-inch wheel e-mounted bike today, granted, but I think the similarities are pretty stark. I just want to point out, back then, got a 19-year-old Ben Winder, both wheels off the ground, hitting GBU, which is a double black trail. So Cube Stereo 140 Hybrid SL 27.5, widely regarded as one of the first e-mountain bikes, although I think the Specialized Levo should take a big part of that credit too. But time now to go and have a look at one of those high bikes from 10 years ago and how it's fared over that time. Wow, can't believe it, folks. This is the actual bike from that magazine piece 10 years ago. The high bike, 180mm travel with the Bosch drive unit. So I'm going to do a bit of comparing and contrasting this bike to what we've got nowadays. I think I need to start off by saying when we were riding this bike, we weren't really worried about the tech on the bike. We were actually more worried about, should we actually have this bike in the magazine? Should we actually be seen out on the trails riding an e-mountain bike? It really was a no-go zone for so many people 10 years ago. So let's have a look then at a few of the key features. Now, there's a Bosch 500 watt-hour semi-integrated battery on this bike. We weren't even talking about, well, we were talking about range. We did have range anxiety back then with the 500s and the 400s, but we didn't even think about the fact that we could have an 800 watt-hour battery in the down tube that's pretty much not too dissimilar to a mountain bike. But, you know, things have moved on. We've now got 800s, we've got 900s, we've got range extenders. So the shape and form of the bike definitely has changed in 10 years. If you look at the motor on this bike, now the key difference between this motor and the Cube motor is the fact that this is now the Bosch Performance Line CX motor, so increased torque. But what you'll notice is actually this motor is tilted in the chassis, so that is pretty much ahead of the time. We've got an idler on the bike, which many people say is revolutionary. This was on a bike 10 years ago. Some of the other e-mountain bike system parts, there is no top tube display, that came much later on. We've got a very crude Bosch Nyon display on the top. This already had some fixes from Matt, and we've got the remote there, still working. Although, as you can see today, things have got much more compact, much more minimalist on eMTBs. Two things which are really important on this bike. Matt is still doing 25 miles several times a week on the bike, which means it's actually a really efficient motor. And the fact that the second point is really key, he has never, ever serviced that Bosch Performance Line CX motor in 10 years. Now, we kind of had an idea that this might be the best motor out there from our visit to Pete Collard at the eBike Motor Centre down in Ringwood last year, where he said that actually this is one of the best Bosch motors ever made. So I think that is testament to Pete's comments and the fact that it's still running. If we look at some of the geometry numbers on this bike, 180mm travel, it's got a 65-degree head tube angle. It's got a 370mm bottom bracket height and a 460 chainstay. Now, a 180mm travel bike today would have a 63 to 64-degree head tube angle. No bikes have got a 370mm bottom bracket height, I can assure you that. The bike's now around about 335, 340. The C-tube angle is quite slack. Bikes today have got a more upright C-tube angle, which means you can get better weight distribution on the bike. And things such as the reach on the bikes, the wheelbase on the bikes, these have got much longer. This bike has actually got 27.5-inch wheels on it. You will struggle to find any e-mountain bike today with 27.5 front and rear. Remember, this bike was at the turning point between 26 and 27.5 back in the day. I think Josh Bryceland had only just won a World Cup downhill race on a 27.5, so this bike is very much ahead of the curve when it comes to wheel size. And I think, you know, overall, the kind of shape and form of the bike, things have moved on significantly, but in terms of performance, still running. Okay, just fire it up. You can see already the modes are different. You've got Eco, Tour, Sport, and Turbo mode, although I did notice then that eMTB is flashed up, so you might have had an update at the time. Wow, okay, small wheels, feels nimble. First thoughts, quiet motor. The motor kind of feels loose and free running, but definitely quiet. Definitely as quiet as many eMTBs today. Power-wise, yeah, I mean, you know, it's got less power, but then, you know, we're 10 years ahead in terms of the software. Wow, that is quite something. Cable routing, quite crude cable routing, but nevertheless it is internal. If you look down here, some of this cabling, all that cabling is now integrated into the frames, and yeah, wow. I mean, brakes not yet got up to the kind of 200, 220 mil rotors. Bars are pretty wide. The seat dropper, I think there was an externally cabled seat dropper on this bike. Obviously nowadays everything's internal. Wow. High bike, Enduro, Xduro Pro 27.5. Things definitely have changed in 10 years, but maybe not as much as people might make out. Remember, this bike is 21.3 kilos. Interesting times.